Welcome back to the Godly Young Men Podcast, Episode 5. We want to encourage you to like, comment, subscribe, all the stuff that is interactive. We want to encourage you to do that. But we're going to go ahead and get right into today's episode. Young people nowadays, they hear a lot about peer pressure, right? And they're probably sick of hearing that phrase. And we're not talking specifically about peer pressure, but I want everybody who's listening to kind of think about the fact that there is so much pressure in society these days for young people to kind of conform to the majority opinion, right? And if there's an opinion that's held by a lot of people, young people and even older people can kind of feel the pressure to just kind of go with what everybody's thinking, groupthink, right?
Yep.
Everybody needs to be thinking the same thing. And so that, again, I think young people really struggle with this, especially young men, because it's like, well, I don't want to appear too weird. I don't want to appear too far out there. It's typically way easier to not deal with the controversy and just to kind of go with what everybody else is saying. We don't think that's a good thing. And, obviously don't just be a contrarian and just be different for the sake of being different, which we'll get to later. But really, we as young men, we as men need to be able to say hard things.
Right.
And that's what this episode is about.
Yeah, say hard things. That's what we're titling this. Say the hard things. Because we have an entire generation and culture that refuses to, because we're afraid of who we might offend. We're afraid of all sorts of things. And I think we see this more in public schools, where it's the peer pressure to conform. You see that a lot because everybody in your class thinks that Ariana Grande's new album is great. It's objectively not, right? You may think otherwise. I don't know.
No comment.
And I don't even think she's got a new album. But those type of things that I'm saying, nobody wants to stand up and go, guys, it's the Emperor's New Clothes. There's a lot about, and of course in the Emperor's New Clothes, he's naked, and everybody goes, well, you look great, because nobody wants to stand up and go, hey, he's naked. And then when he does, well, you can't say those things. And this is...
Is that like a movie? I've never...
No, it's an old fable. Or story or whatever that, has the moral of somebody's got to stand up and say the hard things.
When nobody else is
When nobody else will.
Right.
And so, yes, there's spiritual applications. We want to get into that. But there's also not spiritual applications to this. It's easy for us to, and especially for this podcast, I think we can kind of go into, okay, let's spiritualize things. And we certainly want to. We're the godly young men.
Most important. Right.
That's the most important thing. However, saying hard things goes to all sorts of things in culture, and really standing up for what you believe in, and that's what we're losing, because I think there's pressure to conform, but it's really tough to stand up and say some of these things when it's just easier if I don't. Easier if I don't, but then nobody actually knows you.
The perfect example is kind of what we talked about with our last episode, with this idea of working out and exercise. We believe every young man, really every man, but every young man specifically, should exercise and work out.
That's right.
That's not something that's a general consensus. That's something a lot of people think is just kind of secondary, not really a big deal. We even brought up how there's a lot of people in the church, preachers specifically, who are overweight, and we said that that's a bad thing. That's something that is not universally agreed upon.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's something that we believe needs to be said. And again, that's not necessarily on the biblical end of things, but just stuff like that is kind of what we're getting at. So, Joe, I want to ask you specifically, when we're titling an episode, "Say the Hard Things." Right. What hard things do young men 15 to 25, and again, even older than that, need to be saying?
As I said, we first have to go to the spiritual. We are fighting a culture war. We're fighting a battle against the culture that hates Christianity. They hate anything having to do with God, with Jesus and the resurrection. So when we think about what hard things do we need to say, at 15 you go, man, I don't have, especially if you're homeschooled. I think probably a lot of our watchers are homeschooled, our listeners. I don't have those problems, right? I don't say this. We're looking to train up the next generation. You will have times, whether that's at college, whether that's in your church, with your youth group, whatever it is, as you get older, even in your marriage, the ability to say these things, and we have to stand on the truth. And so, first and foremost, stand for what's right. There's three that we want to get into. First, stand for what's right. And when we think about this, Christianity is the only true religion. I think this is one that's under attack so much in our culture, because can we really say Christianity is right? There's so many religions out there.
Well, it's postmodernism, absolute truth. Right? Everybody needs to have their own truth, and who are you to say that their truth is different? That's a very new movement.
Can we know that Christianity is the only way to God? What if, and I had somebody ask me recently, what if all of these ways are kind of to God, which is more of the Oprah thing.
New Age,
yeah. We all come to God in our own way. No, Christianity is 100% true.
And you can say that confidently.
And you can say that. And how do we say that confidently? Well, I don't know. My God came down to earth, said that he was going to die and be resurrected, and he did.
Just spitballing here.
Just take it out loud. And, if your God came down to earth and did the same exact thing and called his shot, said, I'm going to be resurrected, and then was resurrected, I guess he gets to make the rules, and maybe
Right.
yours is just as equal. Until that happens, until you have historical evidence to back these things up, sit down, please.
Right.
Let the true religion, let the true spirituality come forward. My God is better than your God, no matter what that may be. Say the hard things. And that's what we need, especially in a postmodern world. First and foremost, Christianity is the only true religion.
I think about the movie God's Not Dead, where you hear this scenario played out where there's this atheistic professor
Yep.
that is just rabid in his atheism and just so heavily opposed to the idea of God. And in that movie, you've got this young college student that is a follower of Christ, at least he says he is. And there's some other things in that movie as far as instruments and worship and things that we don't agree with, but he believes in God. Well, this atheistic professor on day one of class, for those of you who haven't seen it, says in order for us to get through this first day, everybody has to write God is dead on their paper. And everybody in the class takes out a pen and starts writing down. And you can see this young man in the movie kind of looking around going like, what do I do? And that's kind of what we're talking about, is this pressure to conform. Now, I don't think a lot of our listeners are ever going to have that scenario. That does happen.
Right.
There are rabid atheistic professors out there that are going to really attack a young person for their faith. But again, a lot of our watchers and listeners will go to Christian school. It's just not something that they're going to deal with probably.
Right.
But you are going to have other instances in which you need to stand up, just like that young man in that movie, where maybe you've got a close friend, maybe you've got a family member who's starting to maybe take a more love-based approach to things like homosexuality or things like, they're not turning their back on God.
right.
They're not saying God isn't real. They're just maybe compromising on some biblical principles
right.
like the LGBTQ movement or like maybe women's roles in worship. And again, they're not saying they don't believe in God or anything like that,
Right.
but they're compromising. That's what we're talking about when we say these are times where you need to stand up and say, no, that's not true.
Well, you're saying it exactly. First and foremost, stand up for what's right. The Bible's 100% accurate. Christianity is the only true religion, things like that. But to your point, stand up for what's not.
Sure.
Stand up for what's right, but
Stand up for what's wrong.
against what's wrong.
And that's the second thing.
Right, and
yeah.
that's the second part of this. And as you just referenced with LGBTQ, and look, this is one that gets you in immediate hot water. A man is a man, a woman is a woman. Yeah, in the world, they get you in hot water. In the church, you say, okay, we have defined roles, and a woman is to be quiet and submissive and to listen to the voice of her husband, and if she's a daughter, to listen to the voice of her father.
Sure.
And if you as a man are doing your job, it's not to listen to the voice of your wife, it's to lead your family. Things like that, you have to be able to come out and say, feminism is wrong. To the idea that my wife gets to basically push the agenda in my family, she gets to be, we're co-leaders. And no, you're not. That's wrong. To say the hard things means we need to be able to also come out and say abortion is 100% wrong no matter what. People push on it. Well, what about rape? What about incest? What about all these things? What if the mother's going to die?
It's
Abortion's
wrong.
always
It's
wrong.
just wrong.
It's always wrong. These are, and it's about reading the time. It's about reading the place.
Well, and again, for all you young guys that are watching and listening to this, I sympathize with you because you think about how much, you use the analogy of a stream, right? That you're flowing downstream. Culture is pushing you so heavily into one direction.
Right.
Again, especially if you're public schooled. Your friends, those are social media, entertainment is pushing so heavily in one direction. And so I understand, you feel the pressure to just go along with it and kind of conform. And so, but that's what we're encouraging you to do, is to not do that, because we've started out a lot of our episodes with a question of, like, for instance, the Strive for Greatness episode, we started out asking, why do young men not strive for greatness? And then episode 2, we asked, well, why do New Year's resolutions fail? We haven't really asked this question yet of why do a lot of young men nowadays not say the hard things? And there are 2 reasons that I'll give, and then I'll ask you to maybe comment on them. Number 1, and again, this is, I guess, to the defense of all those who are young, we've watched several generations who don't say the hard things either.
That's right. Their parents or grandparents.
They've lived through the times that have allowed this atrocity that is Drag Queen Story Hour come to, they haven't said the hard things. And so they haven't seen people do it. The other thing is they don't like controversy. You see that really in the church of, like, not really wanting to hurt anybody's feelings and making sure you don't offend, which you brought up a second ago. And so our encouragement to you as young men is to not let that stop you.
Right.
Obviously, we don't want to be jerks. We don't want to be abrasive. We don't want to be going around looking for somebody to offend. But at the same time, if you're saying truth, if you're saying something that's right and something that you believe is right, why on earth are you letting somebody who might, quote unquote, get offended or get up in arms? Don't let that stop you.
Right. And that's what I was getting at with the time and place. There's a time and place for this. It's easy to say the to be in a church setting and say, well, homosexuality is wrong. Amen. Amen. Pound the pulpit type of thing. And wow, that's huge.
Right.
Everybody agrees. That's not really the hard thing. Go into the public schools and say that. Go around your buddies who all think that it's perfectly fine. To say abortion is 100% wrong all the time, that's not that difficult in a church setting. That's really difficult as you get out into the world. Okay, so we get into the church. We need men who read the Times, who aren't just worried about looking good at, like making sure that the world thinks that they're super kind. Everybody in church as well. That's why I say things like the gender roles. Be willing to stand up against those in church to say the hard things as well. Read the room, read the time, because we have a lot of young guys that'll get up and preach difficult messages that everybody believes in except the extreme left.
Sure.
You're not speaking to the extreme left. That's not that difficult to say, but it is difficult to step on toes to the people that you're speaking to.
Well, for all of our young men, too, think about, like, I don't know, I don't want to call it a more minor issue, but something that's not quite as broad as what you're talking about. But maybe you got buddies that they all went to see a movie or something, and no Christian has any business seeing that movie. Again, the pressure is to, cool, how was the movie? You know what I mean? Like, not to say anything, don't stir up controversy. Whereas the hard thing to say is, hey, what are you guys doing? You don't need to be watching that movie. Stuff like that. Or, again, calling somebody's clothing immodest. That's something that nobody likes to hear.
Right.
That's a hard thing that we need to say. No, you shouldn't be wearing that. That's not something a Christian should be doing. Stuff like that is a little bit more on the, again, I don't want to say minor because it's still important, but less of a broad sense. That's also what we're calling and encouraging, and we're working on ourselves, young men, to do, is to call those things out. Right. Don't just feel the pressure to conform and go with it because I don't really want to hurt anybody's feelings. No, we're supposed to be different. We're called to be set above, and this is a way to do it.
That's right. So as we're talking, stand up for what's right, stand against what's wrong. And third, and you kind of alluded to this with that one, but stand up for what you truly think. Your opinion does matter.
Sure.
We can get so worried about peer pressure and about people thinking we're mean or whatever else. And
don't get us wrong, adults do this too. And not to cut you off.
Yeah,
this is something, groupthink is a term that is used for people who,
I agree.
They all get together and they all kind of feel pressure to think the same thing. There's no differing opinions.
Right.
Differing opinions is okay. That's kind of, sorry not to cut you off.
And to stand up and passionately pursue your different opinion, like to passionately say, hey, I think this is wrong. You could say, especially with young friends, and we get into some of the teenage stuff, certain TikTok trends are just stupid. Can we be straight up honest about that?
Yeah, that milk box challenge or whatever. I don't know if that was a TikTok thing. That might not be. But where you were climbing up on this mountain of milk crates and you just watch people just plummet 12 feet. And it's like, what are you doing? But stuff like that.
Yeah, and I'm not even on TikTok, but you'll see these people either on the side of the road or in certain places that are doing stupid stuff. That's probably a TikTok trend. Can we just call it out and say, that's really dumb? We don't need to conform to that. If all your friends are watching some show that you think is really dumb, oh, that's hilarious. No, it's genuinely not. It's just not funny. They all think it's hilarious. I don't. I stand up for that opinion. I think, things like the Beatles are the greatest band of all time. We're going to come back around toward the end. We're going to come back around toward the end with a couple maybe hot takes or things and discuss that. But I think opinions matter, and I strongly stand for some of these opinions.
I want to real quick, because I want to continue on this point, but there's one I left out. I knew I was leaving it out when we were talking about stuff that's maybe more minor, that's spiritually speaking wrong, or pornography is another big one that a lot of young men, specifically because all their friends are looking at it and they think it's kind of normal, that they don't cool they don't call anybody out. Again, let's say you don't have a porn addiction yourself, but your friends do. Call it out.
Yeah,
it's time to say the hard things. I apologize that I'm going back into a different point, but that's something I didn't want to leave out, is because, again, stuff can be considered so normal or so accepted that we never say the hard things about it. I think pornography for young men is one of those things.
That's a great point. Really, this is about, we can't possibly cover all of them. We really can't. Because you're going to hear all sorts of things. What we're saying is it's a mindset shift to say the things that need to be said. So if it is pornography, if it is the modesty, if it is things that are that in your heart that's not right, be willing to stand up for it. Yeah. And if it's something that you truly believe, even if it's minor, even if it has nothing to do with spirituality, believe it. We want to be chameleons and we want to conform, and I guess that is funny, and I guess this, and then we're shocked that nobody knows the real us, that nobody knows what we think. We don't even know what we think, and we haven't told ourselves, our inner selves, it's worth believing, because we're too busy conforming.
Well, there's nothing that is more I don't want to say annoying, but that's really the only word I can think of right now. For the person that when you're going around asking fun questions about, hey, what's your favorite movie, or what's your favorite fast food, or just any question, and the guy that goes, you're kind of looking around like, what's everybody else saying, and just kind of agreeing with everybody else. Those kind of people are just, have an opinion.
That's right.
Say the hard things and that kind of stuff. It's just frustrating to me that I think there's a lot of young men that it's, again, they kind of test the room. They want to see, well, is this opinion going to be okay? Rather than just, man, come out and say it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And not even, as you said earlier, not even young men. This is a human problem. This isn't a young man problem. We're not calling out just all the young men who don't, get their stuff together. Like, we're
encouraging you to be better than the adults who do this.
Exactly. The adults, as you mentioned earlier, why don't we say these things? We haven't seen this done. The adults do the same thing. They don't always stand for what they believe. Or if they do, sometimes they're doing it for the wrong reasons. We're going to get to that in a second. But you've touched on this point. I want to move to kind of the next point of why are we afraid to conform? Or why are we afraid to stand up? The peer pressure, yes. Ultimately, I think we strive for the praise of men, and Jesus talks a lot about that, right? Like, you have your reward in full. If you're striving for the praise of men, great. You'll lose all your influence, and you'll lose the praise of God. I think that's a key point to that really comes into this discussion in saying hard things is you have to not care what people think.
That's so big.
You have to not care. My dad used to say something. He'd say, if you don't agree with them in any other thing, why would you care about the way that they view you? So
that's a great point.
And I thought, well, that's... I would get ticked that, hey, this person doesn't think this. And I thought, man, literally everything down the line, I don't agree with their politics. I don't agree with their religion. I don't agree with this and that.
But you care what they think about what you say.
Yes, but I agree that somehow I'm not good. Really? That doesn't make any sense. Why would we do that?
Well, to me, and social media has really messed us up here, and about we just really care what everybody else thinks. And that's something that we want to be liked. We want to be accepted. And a part of that is human nature. Again, that's not to say that you shouldn't want to be liked, that you shouldn't want to be accepted. But at some point, you have to be willing to, again, get past the idea that, well, I just want everybody to agree with what I'm saying, or to be liked, or to... You shouldn't care about that to some extent. Again, we've already touched on the spiritual things. That's obvious that you should not care if somebody disagrees with you on that. But even some of the other stuff that I guess we'll wrap up with here in just a second, man, don't be after the praises of men. Again, don't go out trying to be a jerk and make people mad at you. But there's so many young men that I think just want to be popular and want to be liked. And again, they want the praises of men. We cannot make that our aim. We can't make that our main objective.
Once you get it, cool.
Good for you.
You can only lose it, or you can't gain any more once you have it. And what are you going to lose in the process of trying to keep that?
Yeah.
That's the question we have to ask ourselves is, okay, great. Everybody loves me. Now what? Now what? Has that boosted me in any way? Has that helped? Yeah. Being smart business-wise and getting people to appreciate and like you, yeah. We're talking about something different. We're talking about you conforming yourself and not allowing the true Joe, the true Will, to be known, so as to make sure that other people think that, well, I want them to think I'm cool or whatever it may be. Why? What does that gain you? On the other end, let's go to the other opposite end of the spectrum here.
Which is also not great. Yeah.
Which is also not great. We can also spend all our time swimming upstream for the purpose of swimming upstream, just to be a contrarian.
Just to be different.
Just to be different. Just to be that guy that is, I'm always different. I always take it different. And then your identity becomes not what everybody else is. Your identity becomes the guy who just has problems with everything. And hey.
Yeah, and the guy who's just being different for the sake of being different. I heard an opinion one time. Just somebody that said, yeah, this is just fact. Burger King has the best burger out there. And I looked at I was like, there's no way you actually believe that. That's got to be a joke. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I hope no offense to our Burger King fans, but it's that's objectively false.
It's objectively false. Everybody knows
But people do stuff like that where they'll just purposely say something that's different. We're not talking about that, Right. But again, if you have an opinion that Burger King is the best burger, you're wrong. Sorry. That's a terrible
But stand
opinion.
up for it. If you do, tell me why.
Yeah.
Tell me why.
Defend yourself.
Defend yourself. Tell me, hey, no, I agree. Don't go, well, Joe and Will said it's stupid. That's exactly to our point.
Yeah.
I even get into it you're an idiot if you think that. Well, stand up for it if you truly believe it. But I agree, there's a contrarian side of it of well, everybody believes this, therefore I'm going to believe something different. That's an overcorrection of the problem. It's not about always. Sometimes people are right. The majority is right. A lot of times they're not right. Are you able to discern the difference between, okay, they're right on this one, and yeah, I genuinely think that's correct, versus they're off on that and I'm willing to stand for it. If you find yourself going against the grain every single time, check yourself.
Yeah.
Just take a step back and go, why am I doing that?
And to bring it back around, you brought up the swimming upstream thing. Again, if we could communicate one thing about this episode, it's that, again, culture is pushing you down the stream. You do need to swim upstream. You need to go in the opposite direction of the culture. That's the whole purpose for this podcast. Yeah. That's why we designed this, is because culture is pushing young men a certain direction that we think is terrible. It's terrible for their soul, terrible just for the sake of being a man, and so we want to go the other direction. Part of that is, once again, you've got to be willing to say the hard things. You've got to be willing to have buddies that say something and you just be like, no, I don't think so. Not just agree with everything that they say. And so, yeah, that's really kind of how I wanted to sum it up.
Yeah.
As we wrap here, give me your most random, or I guess most fun piece of like an opinion, a hill that you will die on, an opinion that you have no matter what I'm going to say or anybody else says. And then I'll give mine. And this is something while he's thinking, comment, what is your opinion about your favorite candy, movies, music, whatever? Obviously, hopefully, you can stand strong in your spiritual beliefs, things that we've already touched on. But more on the for fun side. Comment, what are some of your hills that you'll die on?
Yeah, what's the hard thing you're gonna say?
Yeah.
I got a lot of them, but I would say the one that I catch flack for and that I think is that I will absolutely die on this hill. I think country is the very worst music genre.
Oh my goodness!
I think country is a brutal music genre. Can't stand it.
Yeah, we'll agree to disagree there.
I think it is, especially now, it's twangy pop. If a guy can't make it an actual pop music, then he just puts a twang to his voice.
You prefer jazz, huh?
I like jazz. I listen to jazz. Legitimately, okay. Yeah, I have jazz playlists on Spotify. I listen to pretty much everything else. Death metal, not as much. And there's some outside. K-pop, there's a few bad ones, but nothing takes the cake more than country because of the pandering nature of, like,
such a generalization.
Oh my goodness, they're all the same. They're all saying about the same exact stuff, and they're more sexual than a lot of rap artists these days. I'm telling you what, I can't stand it.
So, case in point here, Joe firmly believes that
and I believe that for well over a decade.
Wrong, but that's okay that he's wrong,
and Will's allowed to be wrong too, so that's all right. How about yours?
Mine is, I think I've briefly mentioned it before. I think LeBron James is the greatest basketball player of all time.
I do agree with.
That is something that
most people don't.
Nobody likes it when I say. My dad gives me so much. My dad hasn't watched a basketball game in 10 years. I don't know if he watches these, but he gives me so much grief. And anybody, that is it's fun to hate LeBron these days, so I get a lot of hate for that. But that's something I will passionately defend.
Oh yeah, and anybody Look, if you are born in basically before 1990, then you have this idea that everything that took place around that era,
it's a nostalgia thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's everything that took place. The 80s is the greatest music decade of all time.
It's just not.
and you get all of these, the 80s was the greatest movie because The Breakfast Club and Say Anything, and you're like, all right, pump the brakes and stop thinking through the lens of the 80s and just the 90s and consider everything. I agree with you. I think you have to see that LeBron is the best. Well, what about the rings? Yeah, we could go off on that. But
maybe we'll devote a whole episode
We might devote a whole episode to that. We probably could,
We definitely could.
But we come back around to what's the purpose of what we're trying to say here. Have you heard this before? You need to step up and say the hard things. Yeah, you probably have. The question is, are we going to do it? And that's a challenge for you. That's a challenge for me, for both of us. And for if you're watching, if you're listening, are you willing to stand up and say the hard things to your friends? And not just to the people that agree with you, saying the hard things of that. Say the hard things to the people that don't. Talk to your church about those things. Talk to your friends and be willing to swim upstream, not for the sake of swimming upstream, but for the sake of standing for what you believe.
Well, in all of our episodes, you might, look at and well, yeah, sure, okay, I know that, but that is the question. Are you actually going to do it?
Right.
The episodes that we've had, yeah, okay, I know I need to strive for greatness. Well, are you actually doing it? Because according to culture, a lot of young men aren't. Set goals for yourself. Are you actually doing it? Well, yeah, I got to have a better relationship with God. Are you actually doing it? That it comes to every single episode we've had so far. That's what it ultimately comes down to. And so, again, that's why we took it from the most important thing, that being your spiritual life and the things that you believe in, the Bible, of course, and then kind of going down the list of, stand firm in these things. Don't be the person that just kind of goes with the wave of the culture or the wave of your friends or, what everybody else thinks, that's what I'm going to think too, and I'm not really going to have my own opinion. Don't be that person.
The church and the future of the church depends on men being men.
Yeah.
And standing for what you believe and saying the hard things when no one else agrees. That's what the future of the church demands. We have to have it. The church is in decline because we don't have that right now. So that's why we're calling on you as young men, on ourselves as young men. We have to step up. We have to take the mantle forward because the church is literally depending on our ability to do this very thing. And if you don't do it now, what makes you think you'll do it when you get there? Well, I'll kind of conform here, and then when that time comes and I'm ready to kind of step into the role of a leader in the church, that's when I'll do it. It doesn't work that way.
Got to start
You
now.
have to develop the mindset now of saying the hard things, doing the hard things, being the man that God's called you to be, and taking a stand for something. If you take a stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything, right?
Yep.
As I think I butchered that statement, but either way, say the hard things. That's what this is all about.
Yeah, and I'll push one more time. Comment the things that you firmly believe that nobody can convince you otherwise. We want to hear from you. Subscribe, like, all those things. But unless you have anything else to add, we very much appreciate you joining us for episode 5 of the Godly Young Men podcast.